Hello and welcome again to Unit 2. My name is Anthony Maddox. I'm the instructor for this Thinking Like an Engineer course, mini course from the HP Catalyst Academy. And by now you've had a chance to take a look at Unit 1, the video, also take a look at our readings. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the report on engineering and K-12 education, in particular pages 76 through 92 to give you a sense of what we're going to do today. And I'd like to encourage you to reflect back on Unit 1. And realize that you should have probably two major things in your hands right now, so to speak. One is a problem in K-12 engineering that you wish to solve or address. Something of interest to you that attracts your attention that would encourage you to explore even more. Secondly, you've decided based on your experience or where you think you're going, where you want to go, a design of some type, an artifact. It's either a portfolio of multimedia resources, if you will, that advances your ideas or secures your ability to be able to advance your pedagogy or practice in teaching and learning, to a plan for a unit, maybe a lesson, or perhaps even a program that you feel is important around K-12 engineering. Or three, you may have a proposal because you're assuming the role of advocate now. You're taking your experience and moving it to a different space. This is your launching pad, a way to share your ideas. It could be, the proposal could be a blog, it could be any other kind of thing too. It could be a proposal to a funder. It could be something to a particular supervisor or administrator, something that you would use to actually move yourself forward in this particular domain. So having that as a background, we're going to move towards something different this week or in this unit. And what we're going to move towards is what's called STEM interconnectedness. This course is based on 3 habits of mind outlined in that engineering and K-12 education report. One is engineering design. We touched on that last week. The second is what's called the importance of mathematics, science, and technology, if you will, in the engineering domain. And I've broadened that a little bit to talk about STEM interconnectedness. Because one of the things they outline in that particular piece is that the experience and developmental appropriateness, if you will, is very important. Not everyone has had engineering and science or mathematics or even technology background, but are very interested in K-12 engineering. This course is for all of you, those who have deep knowledge in the STEM disciplines and those who may have only surface knowledge in the disciplines, but are interested in, if you will, in how they may all come together or how you may make some use of that. The last one are what are called habits of mind. We'll get into habits of mind in Unit 3 and Unit 4, but the habits of mind integrated with the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and then integrated with engineering design all comprises what the National Research Council believes is an appropriate way to consider and launch an engineering and K-12 education kind of effort. So for this particular unit, we will actually focus on, if you will, this idea of STEM interconnectedness. Let's talk about STEM. And if you would, pull up your report for your engineering, your National Research Council report, and look at page 17 if you haven't read it, and review and take a look at those 4 descriptions of the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's important for you to kind of own these ideas in some sense, not necessarily parrot them or repeat them, but to take them and understand what they mean to you and creation of artifact or creation of something in the context that you're addressing in your K-12 learning environment. I'd like to revisit one idea from last week around science that may help for those who may have surface knowledge of science, but want to see science in a manner in which you can be inclusive in this particular world of K-12 engineering. Science is around phenomena in the natural world, ways in which we see, understand, and analyze in a rigorous way what it is we're seeing and looking for principles, regularities, if you will, in what we see in science. And those regularities in the natural world are what engineers have access to. They're constrained by the natural world. They're constrained by the things we all see and do, and we understand in different ways. And that helps us create things, helps engineers create things, helps us solve problems, if you will, as people. Also in that particular, on the page 17, they talk about technology as the product of science and engineering. And very often scientific endeavor and engineering endeavor requires some type of technology. So think about it this way. A technology then is the product of some rigorous discipline of study that reflects a phenomena existing or observable in the real world. And it also now is designed under constraint. It is a set of processes, ways of being, habits of mind, you name it, that combine with that science to create a technology. And what's interesting about the process is that the creation of technology just brings about more science, it brings about more engineering, and there's this interesting loop or feedback, if you will, that through the creation of technologies, which is using science and engineering, no matter how rudimentary it may be, to actually build on top of prior learning, prior understanding of the natural world, and our ability to be able to make things based on our understanding of that natural world. And then, of course, there's engineering, which is design under constraint. We talked about that before, and the solution of problems, if you will. We have a pretty good hold of that by now, at least we should. And think about that even more as you progress through the various units of this course, and think in more like an engineer, if you will, and see how engineers think. Lastly, but not least, is mathematics. Mathematics there is very nicely, I think, presented to the reader, because mathematics is, again, thinking in symbols, figuring out ways to kind of looking at patterns, relationships, quantities, numbers, and shapes. So now we can use our understanding of that and our understanding of symbols to kind of get this interconnectedness necessary to fuel what engineering needs. And if you think of symbols, if you wish, relax the constraints on mathematics as you understand it, and think of other symbol systems that you actually might know that are related to the ideas of patterns, relationships, so forth and so on. Think about music. For those of you who are out there inclined in music, same thing, an order, a quantification, if you will, patterns, symbols, relationships. Think about money and currencies in various countries, euros, dollars, yen, various kinds of currencies in terms of how numbers and what they represent economically come together. Think about natural languages, if you will, language we speak, Tagalog, English, Portuguese, Russian, various languages we might use, and what the symbols are and their regularity and their patterns. Think about artificial languages, computer languages like, or web-based languages like Java or maybe C++, or even some of the older languages from people that from like myself, remember from a long, long time ago. Kind of, if you will, computational languages, if you will, that still express an ability to be able to get a computer to do what you want it to do, and the various ins and outs of algorithms and various ways in which data and memory and other kinds of computational elements come together. All of these are symbol sets. All of these are abilities to be able to have mathematics somewhere involved in them, even though they may not be directly related necessarily with algebra or geometry or those kinds of mathematics that we have seen or participate in our educational endeavors, or maybe work with in terms of school. So, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Take for a moment and expand your view. Look at all the disciplines, if you will, and don't forget some of those disciplines have sub-disciplines, if you will, like various types of science, biology, chemistry, physics, various types of mathematics, various types of engineering, and of course various types of technology. So take that world, expand it a little bit, get a view, because having a sense of all of those things is part of what engineering asks for. And again, it's one of the engineering general principles, if you will, of moving K-12 engineering into schools in a very firm and strong way, is to look at them in that way. But now let's depart a bit. Let's move from the idea of STEM to STEMX. And the H.P. Callis Academy is very strong in supporting this idea of STEMX. And if you do, again, a search, and search for symbols or text on the web, you'll see many, many instantiations, many places where STEMX kind of surfaces and arises. But let's take a look at STEMX. What STEMX suggests is that it helps us learn how to operationalize STEM in a way. Certainly we could by its own, by those four disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, make STEM integration work, if you will. And we'll talk about that term integration in a moment. At the same time, if we start adding other things to STEM, we get a way to operationalize STEM in new and different ways. For example, you've heard of STEAM. And STEAM is the integration of the arts. There are many people who are on that particular focus and path and looking at how arts play a role, if you will. And arts, in some sense, are symbols. They're symbols of paintings or theater or other kinds of things that humans do, and that we can put in terms of our talent and skill in the midst of STEM thinking and learning, and to be very fruitful as an endeavor. Also think it from the standpoint of disciplines. In other words, other disciplines can inform STEM. It could be psychology. It could be learning sciences. It could be various other kinds of disciplines other than the natural sciences, engineering as we understand it, chemical, electrical, industrial, mechanical, you name it, other than, if you will, the mathematics, algebra, geometry, and calculus, and other than various kinds of technologies, if you will, that we might create in various ways. Some have electrons running through them and some not, but I'll get back to that in a moment as well. So STEMX then is the addition of other disciplines, arts possibly, also the addition of skills. Various skills that we or engineers or scientists need to have, teachers need to have, educators need to have, program directors need to have to pull the STEM equation together in some kind of way. So you can see what's happening now, right? We're creating another problem space. First, the problem space we looked at was as engineers, if you will, for this course. We looked at the problem space of K-12 engineering integration, or moving K-12 engineering into the classroom, into the learning environments, into schools. Now we see that STEM with STEMX also now starts to explode, if you will. It starts to now see there are many, many, many more alternatives other than those 4 disciplines. And so before we actually start to wonder, how can we make sense of it? Let's use some principled ways of doing that. And I have some ideas that I'd like to present to you that may give you a way to get a sense of that. It may help you with your design, even help with problem solving, if you will. And don't forget, we learned this last time, is that there's this back and forth, this iteration, this refinement between problem and solution and design, back and forth. And we want to actually now start to use our understanding, deepen our understanding of STEM and STEMX to allow us to do that. So if you would, for a moment, come along with me as we talk about STEM and STEMX integration. While integration is one thing, we don't really understand or really necessarily have an understanding of how to integrate. In other words, what's the how-to knowledge of putting all these things together? What's the how-to knowledge of STEM? What's the how-to knowledge of STEMX? Let me introduce 4 concepts to you that may help you. It may help you see and get a better sense of how to put all this stuff together. The first concept I want to connect you with, I want to actually bring to your attention, is the concept of coexistence. Various disciplines, if you will, can coexist. Very often we see disciplines in a kind of a monolithic way. I know biology. It exists here, and other things, I'm not sure where they are. And so now let's consider for the moment that we now not just look at biology, but we also look at something else. Let's say we look at technology, or the technologies that are involved in biology. For example, various powerful electron microscopes, if you will, or various kinds of other tools and instruments used in the field can now come together in biology, as we said earlier. It's like in engineering, using technology. So does science use technology and comes together. So now we look at biology and electron microscope as science and technology coming together to kind of help us teach biology, help us know and learn biology and pull these ideas together. Right? So those are 2 different kinds of ideas in terms of biology and electron microscopy, if you will, and those 2 ideas come together, and these ideas are coexisting. What happens when we start to take the next move and see not only are they coexisting, but perhaps they're actually connected? What are the overlaps between them? So the first case we looked at as ideas being coexisting. The second case we want to look at is the idea of being connected. Coexisting ideas, if you will, are multidisciplinary. Connected ideas are interdisciplinary. What are the connections between them? What do they share, what they might not share? How much of an overlap is it? So now we looked at the case we mentioned before, one of biology and then of technology, if you will, electron microscopy. Now we can look at the other disciplines, in other words, the engineering disciplines, as well as the mathematics disciplines, and see how we have connections between them. You add the X in STEMX and you've got the arts, or you've got various skills and thinking that actually may come into play in terms of looking at how they all fit together. So interdisciplinarily and multidisciplinarily, the STEM disciplines can now start to align, or if you will, interact with one another. Let's go 2 steps further. One step further is looking at what's called holistic ways in which the disciplines get together. So, for example, you may have a discipline like biology and a discipline like technology, and there may be some common threads throughout all of them. For example, you may find some kind of idea in biology that extends its way through technology. There are various ways, let's say, there may be analogies in which biology or technology come together. And you see these threads, if you will, throughout various disciplines. In your report, there is a section on looking at these various beads and how they actually intertwine, if you will, the beads being the STEM disciplines and how they're threaded, if you will. Take a look at that section. It's later on in the report, and this will help you kind of get another example or view of what it means to kind of pull these ideas together. This is what's called transdisciplinarity. In other words, how you now start to take an idea and transit it, in other words, walk it all the way across all the disciplines involved. It's important to remember, everybody, that STEM doesn't necessarily mean pulling all 4 disciplines together all the time in every way, in a complete way. STEM is looking at these 4 disciplines as informing each other, interacting with each other in interesting ways. And one analogy that I've generated working with a student is one of kind of orbital mechanics. If you're a biology person, and biology is the planet that you live on, it's the place that you have, but there are moons orbiting the planet. The moons of technology, the moons of engineering, and also the moons of mathematics, orbiting the planet of biology at various distances, in various ways, and various interactions. So look at, one way to frame it is that the gravity, if you will, or the forces, the orbital mechanics of all the different bodies that may orbit, if you will, or shoot past biology, may be things that influence biology in a way. So come up with your own analogies and ways of seeing how the disciplines can actually come together and fit together in unique ways, especially with your unique problem, especially in your unique context, if you will, the school, organization, classroom you're dealing with. They got to get a sense of doing that. This is important for you, the individual learner. This is a teacher-centered mini course. It focuses on you, what you're thinking, an education-centered, program director-centered kind of course, which looks at how you see the world. And by presenting to you how engineers often see the world, it gives you some kind of sounding board or some kind of reference, if you will, to kind of look and see how you might introduce engineering in the environment you're considering. Lastly, in this section, we want to consider taking a look at something very different. In other words, how their various disciplines might be nested. So when you think about nesting, you think about one within another. So for example, you might find there's a technology, but there's a science underlying the technology. So within that technology is science, and that seems natural, right? If technology is a product of science and engineering, then it's really easy to see, or easier to see, I should say, how science and technology are somehow, if you will, science and engineering are somehow nested within a technology in some kind of way. It's based on a natural law or set of principles. It is based on a design under constraint, and taking those laws and building and manufacturing or creating ways in which you can embody or embed the ideas and understand and practice and be faithful to those principles, if you will, and then the result is a technology. You can have technologies within disciplines, technology within chemistry. So within chemistry, a scientific discipline, there's a technology that allows various kinds of things to happen. For example, titration or other kinds of simple and straightforward scientific ideas in chemistry that students do in schools and laboratories allow students and others to see this nesting, if you will. So there's possibility of looking at that nesting and ways in which various kinds of disciplines are within other disciplines, and this is called cross-disciplinary. So cross-disciplinary, if you will, is this ability to be able to embed these ideas within them, and then to be able to exploit that, leverage that in some kind of way for purposes of learning and sharing ideas. So if we step back then, and we take these ideas of coexisting, connecting, holistic, and nesting, if you will, and be able to see the various ways in which the STEM disciplines can interact, then you're, I think, at a stage where you can start to use the X in STEM X to kind of moderate how all of that is done. Think about that for a moment. You have the 4 basic STEM disciplines, and you have, let's say, the arts. How now will the arts be a way to be able to cause some interaction between the STEM disciplines? How can you use arts in the 5E learning cycle, for example, to engage students, to bring them and focus their attention from walking to school and doing things that young people do and focusing their attention on the lesson of the day or the purpose of the day. Focus even your attention of your colleagues on an idea or purpose or something that they would need to actually make ends meet, something they would need to actually advance an idea, something they would need to actually push or advocate that you could use to advocate for engineering and K-12 education. Think about now what other kinds of X disciplines, think about what other kinds of X skills, that might be necessary to be able to pull these together. So now, in addition to having in one hand this problem that you're solving, in addition to having, again, a design that you've focused on, now you can see, or come to start to think even more and reflect on how the various disciplines might interact. So now start to constrain that space. Again, you need not have all 4 STEM disciplines. You need not have a plethora of other X disciplines and arts and skills. You may decide on one particular skill. You may decide on 2 particular STEM disciplines and how they come together. So as you now start to refine your initial design, the initial design now starts to allow you or ask you to make decisions. It'll ask you to say, okay, where will I rest in here? What will I pull together? What will I try? And it's something really important to remember here is that when you try some things, they may not work. So we have to now start to step back a little bit and think about the notion of failure or things not going the way we think they should go, and be in some sense prepared for that. And so there are some things you have to kind of come to grips with when you build, and we've all accomplished and done some things in our lives where it hasn't worked out quite like we want. But the thinking behind making your choices and figuring out ways so that the STEM disciplines and the X disciplines come together, and now your plan or your proposal or your portfolio is a representation of that, is where we are right now, pulling those things together. With me so far? Hopefully so. And what we'll do is we'll pull together a few more ideas to help us think through that, because sometimes we need tools to build things. So now let's take a really different kind of track here. Let's take a look at thinking maps. And you'll notice that in the materials in preparation for this unit, the link to the Thinking Maps website was there for you to kind of take a look at. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of look through that and see the ideas behind Thinking Maps. And Thinking Maps is a research-based idea that can really help move along your thinking in terms of, no pun intended, your thinking in terms of being able to look at how ideas come together. And I think in particular, I believe at least, that Thinking Maps is a great opportunity to kind of take these STEM ideas and the STEM X ideas and the problem-solving ideas and make sense of them. It's a sense-making process, if you will. Again, a research-based approach. And I would even dare say that if Thinking Maps are research-based ideas, then it's very likely that we can look at Thinking Maps on their own as technologies. Think about it. Research-based ideas have been generated from principled explorations and experiments and how Thinking Maps might work with people and what they represent and how they may be useful. 1. 2, there are constraints. And you find this, if you look at all the different kinds of thinking maps, they're constrained. In other words, they tend to, various types of thinking maps work better in some situations than others. They're more inclined, or the ability to use them in certain ways is more prominent than in other ways. So, if thinking maps are technology, which is the product of science and engineering, if you will, then the thinking maps are yet another technology we can use as engineers in this course to build our proposals, to build our portfolios, and also to build our plans, our lesson plans, our unit plans, or indeed our program plans. So they're technology. So this is an example of the use of a technology that has no electrons running through it in the process of this idea of K-12 integration, the how-to procedural knowledge of putting it together, noting that and putting together these ideas in a learning environment requires putting together some disciplines. It requires some integration at 2 levels, integration among and between disciplines and integration into an environment or context in which we want to actually use the product that we're creating. So let's take a brief look at that. And now what I'll ask you to do is to take a look at and take some time, if you don't have it, or you can pause the video, get the thinking maps out so that you have them readily available to you as I go through them, so that you can take a look at them and think about your problem, think about your design, and think about K-12 integration, and see whether or not, and think about STEM, if you will, and think about how these thinking maps might be used in your process. Ready to continue? Take a look. Okay, we'll go over them one by one, just briefly. Look at the circle map. The circle map is used for defining things in context. And I encourage you to take the purpose, if you will, of a thinking map and use it to start to ask questions. In other words, try to establish an inquiry-based mode for using the thinking maps and creating them on your own. 1. Look at the context, if you will, of what you're working on, and how can a circle map represent that context? And by the way, let me just pause for a moment and say there's no real need to create a thinking map for everything. If you take a look, or even a thinking map at all, this is an opportunity for you to take another representation other than text, an image, if you will, to try to understand and propose or promote an idea to get you to kind of see or understand things a little bit differently. So the context that you're working in and how it can be described can be used, a circle map can be used to do that. A tree map, classifications and groups. Those of you who are familiar with science understand there are various ways of classification, various kinds of taxonomies and grouping necessary to look at like and unlike characteristics, if you will, and then a tree map is useful for doing that. A bubble map is describing something with adjectives, allows you to actually make something and add legs, if you will, to what you would need to do and to express ideas. And those notions of descriptions are important because communication, and we'll see later on in the course, that communication is one of the habits of mind, if you will, of engineers. It is to be able to talk about your designs and move them and have people see what you see in your designs as well as solving the problem. The double bubble map is identifying whole-part relationships, and we can now start to see that, and we can connect that with some of the various ideas we looked at with the connectedness, the idea of integration. How do they interact? For example, in the nesting, we can have one discipline that is a part of another discipline, and there's that whole discipline, if you will, and how they interact, important ideas that you can use thinking maps to express. A flow map, looking at literally the sequencing and ordering of events and situations, and this idea of sequencing. You can see the mathematics in here, the kind of ordinality, if you will, of things. That's important part of understanding various complex problems, very important part of your understanding and someone else's understanding of what you're doing, and how to actually be able to make or propose something that people can readily see solves a problem, and they want to actually use it and take advantage of that in some kind of way. A multi-flow map is a little bit different, and is looking for causes and effects. And causes and effects are indeed a kind of a sequence, right? In other words, you have a cause and an effect. But looking more deeply at the two allows you to kind of separate or play with those ideas in a way, and I always encourage you at every opportunity in this course to think back upon all those STEM disciplines and how they fit together, and think about the engineering mindset and what you bring to bear in terms of emulating that mindset given what you want to do in the classroom. What is your unit about? What kind of advocacy do you see yourself doing? What kind of learning do you have? And what do you need to learn first or learn later? What kind of learner are you? Go back to those ideas in Unit 1, bring them together, and possibly create a thinking map, maybe for you, thinking map for someone else. It's an exercise that's great for students in classrooms. It's an exercise that's great for presenting an idea and a proposal, various ways in which you can use these concepts. The last two, one is called a brace map, and the brace map is used for identifying also whole part relationships too. And lastly, a bridge map is used for illustrating analogies. In other words, the analogy that I used for orbital mechanics, if you will, is a good one to try to use for that as well. So again, thinking maps are useful there. So let's stop for a moment. Take the thinking maps and use those, or consider using those, if not using those ideas that help you take a look at how the STEM disciplines come together. 1. 2, think about all those dissimilarities. Think about how the disciplines can exist or coexist, how they can connect, how they're holistic, and how they may be nested. And then use the X factor, if you will. The X factor meaning arts or disciplines or skills or other kinds of things that you can use to kind of augment STEM. If you step back and look at what Unit 2 was about, or sit back, if you will, and think about what we're trying to accomplish. You brought your problem, and you also brought your solution, if you will, your design, into this particular unit, and now you have available to you to help solve it. In addition to the next generation science standards you took a look at earlier on, and problem-based, project-based, as well as inquiry-based learning, you now start to take that and combine that with these various STEM disciplines and pick and choose. Don't pick them all, pick and choose the ones that make sense. I would suggest picking at least 2 STEM disciplines and using any of the others as necessary, how they may actually fit together or bond in some kind of way. I suggest also thinking about various X disciplines that you would want to focus on for yourself or your learners and how that would happen. And then I suggest now, once you have those ideas, start drawing pictures. Start creating ways in which those thinking maps can now represent your ideas. So when you now end up with next week with a design, you'll end up not only with your initial design for your portfolio or initial design for your proposal or initial design for your lesson, unit, or program plan, but you'll also have a picture. You'll have a thinking map that represents your ideas, and you now start to look at a text version, if you will, as well as look at a image version of what you're doing. You have two representations of your design, your project, enabling you to communicate just that much better. So good luck on creating your initial design. Get your artist hat on to create your designs, your thinking maps, and have that available to you as well. And then I'll see you in the next unit.